I'm very honored today to introduce to you Valerie Smith. She specializes in, well, she wrote an article, she had an article published in Authority magazine called Strategies for Rebuilding Life After Trauma. She is a licensed clinical social worker and certified forest therapy guide, which I find so interesting. She is the founder and owner of Sugar Maple Counseling and Ecotherapy, located in the Hudson Valley of New York. She's also certified in eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, called EMDR for short. It's a highly effective approach to treating traumatic stress. Would you please tell us about complex post-traumatic stress disorder?
Yes, yes. And thank you so much for inviting me for this interview. I really appreciate it. Um, so I'm going to begin by saying that complex PTSD is a controversial diagnosis. And the reason why I say that is we clinicians in the United States have to code for mental health conditions using what's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. That's this big purple manual we have where it has all the recognized conditions in it, and then we diagnose from that. The reason why complex PTSD is controversial is because it's actually not in the DSM. It is, however, in the ICD-9. So it's one of these weird cases of where it is a condition, it is definitely a real thing, it is recognized globally, but just not in the United States.
Huh.
Yes. Um, we social workers theorize the reason for this is because complex PTSD is something that is best treated by psychotherapy. Medication can be beneficial, but it's really not going to do all that much. And not surprisingly, the DSM is written mostly by psychiatrists.
I see.
So, yeah, hand in hand. Um, it's also because there is a condition that has a lot of overlapping symptoms to complex PTSD, which is known as borderline personality disorder. They are not the same thing. Um, it would go really beyond the scope of this interview to go into all the nuances between them, but essentially it's also seen too as, if this isn't broken, why fix it? So the DSM is very, very selective about what gets in and what doesn't. And even though there's been a lot of evidence proving that this should be added and there was an approval board and everything for it, it just didn't make the cut. Uh, that said, though, to actually answer your question, so first, what I need to do is explain what actual just post-traumatic stress disorder is. And post-traumatic stress disorder is a disorder that happens where someone completely exhausts their emotional capacity to be able to deal with some sort of catastrophic event, whether that is literal or perceived. Uh, this can be, what we typically think of, such as like sexual assault or like a really bad car accident or combat or anything of that sort. But usually with post-traumatic stress disorder, it ties back to one singular life-altering event.
Yes.
Complex PTSD is different in that it tends to be a series of ongoing stressful events, usually happening in our formative years. The earlier it happening, the worse it's going to be. So it tends to be cases like child abuse, child neglect, or maybe just some sort of ongoing tension in the family, very relentless bullying, human trafficking, some sort of long-term hostage situation, just anything where it is long-term and it is constantly challenging the person to have to exhaust their emotional capacity to cope with something and leaving them truly, truly feeling powerless.
What
Uh,
was your experience?
I have complex PTSD actually. Um, I was raised in a very, very dysfunctional family. My mother had extreme untreated mental illness, and I was subjected to pretty severe emotional abuse by her. Um, you know, a lot of suicidal ideation by her, a lot of threats of suicide. Her withstanding love from me and kind of using it as this punishment or as something that was conditional. Um, her telling me she had regrets about me being born.
Oh, gee.
Um, this was someone who herself actually suffered from a lot of trauma.
Mhm.
She was sexually assaulted twice, and I didn't know this until I was much older, and she told me that I was actually the first person to even know. And she experienced a lot of death in her immediate family. Her brother, sister, and parents all died when she was relatively young, just during different times in her life.
Yeah.
A little bit of perspective, her mother died only 2 weeks before her wedding.
Mm.
So my mother went through a lot of trauma, and unfortunately, she took it out on my brother and I, but especially on me. And she was also a very severe alcoholic. Um, I have a lot of memories of just finding vodka bottles all over the house in very weird places, like inside like the toilet tank, or like buried in the very back of my closet or something like that. And a lot of my childhood was spent with her really just passed out on the couch. Um, Something I really vividly remember was me being maybe like 4 or 5 years old, and her talking about suicide, and her begging my brother, who's a couple years older than me, to take care of me.
Oh, boy.
She was very, very sick. And uh, my father in some ways was the more rational one, but he was very violent. So my father was arrested quite a few times for domestic violence. And for whatever reason, like my mom would just drop it in court completely. I think the laws have since changed, but at least back then when I was growing up in Massachusetts, they had spousal rights, and that was where the abused spouse could go in and just drop everything. I think it's since changed, but I'm not sure. So a lot of my childhood too was spent with me just witnessing violence, living in perpetual fear, and also then ironically being subpoenaed to court because I was a witness, but they didn't even have me speak, so I just missed school just to sit there and just watch my father in handcuffs. Um, my mother ended up dying from cirrhosis when I was 22, and then I lost my father to adenocarcinoma when I was 34, and in both of those cases, I was also the caregiver and the proxy, and I made all the end of life decisions.
Well, you mentioned that complex PTSD means you can't remember life prior to trauma. And
Yes.
from what you're describing, it sounds like your entire life was very traumatic based on the problems your parents had that they took out on you. What
Yes.
was your turning point?
Um, I would say my turning point for me, well, I ended up having more trauma as a result. I ended up living with someone for a while who's my ex, who was abusive. I'm
Mhm.
not going to get into everything with him. But I bring him up just because when someone's wounded, they get attracted to people who likewise are wounded, and I didn't work enough on myself. I would say my actual turning point though was when um I left him, and I actually spent some time homeless. I was not living on the streets or anything like that, but I was couch surfing. And I
Mhm.
just had this ongoing sense of insecurity, and I was just picking up odd jobs here and there just to try to get by. But my turning point was really when I got with who's now my husband. And he was really the first person in my life to really show me a sense of constancy and stability and safety, which are all keywords that are incredibly important to healing. When someone goes through complex PTSD, they don't have safety, they don't
Right.
have consistency, and they definitely don't have any predictability, because 1 second their parent or whoever it is could be nice and warm, and the very next second they're hitting you or something. Um, and it took me a long time really to work up to that trust. I kind of thought to myself, I'm unworthy of this. This
Mhm.
feels good, but very foreign to me.
Mhm.
But just over time, I really taught myself, you know what? I need to be able to trust in this. I need to be able to trust in him. And I can't let my negative experiences paint how my future is going to be. I can't base every single thing off of what happened to me. So through him and through his parents, I started to see some light in it. And also, I myself got a lot of therapy to really just work on this.
I can understand why you at first ended up in an abusive relationship because that's all you knew. But it must have taken a lot of courage to say, enough of this, I'm leaving, even though what you left to was more insecurity. You mentioned couch surfing, and you also mentioned there were several blocks to completing your training because you didn't have a dependable address.
Yes, yes. It took me over a decade just to earn my bachelor's degree because of that instability. I
Hmm.
will say though, my master's I got in only a year. So I yeah, it was good that I finally had some security and really got to focus on myself.
Yes. Why do you think the adjustment to peace and calm was so difficult?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you what?
Why do you think the adjustment to peace and calm was so difficult?
I think it's just because I was programmed not to know what peace and calmness are. You know, when you come from a family like that, you are constantly operating in fight or flight, or also what's called freeze and fawn. So it's just all these different traumatic states to be in. And at any given moment, you're expecting the worst because the very worst really might happen. So
Yes.
for there to actually be some calmness that starts to be ongoing, it really just feels weird. And I
Yeah.
don't know how to put it any other way. It was, to me, it was almost like I got abducted like by aliens, then got dropped off on some planet, and the planet's actually really great, and all the aliens are being really nice to me and they're treating me well, but I just felt like I was completely out of place.
Hmm.
Really silly metaphor, but I can't think of anything better.
That's an actually pretty good metaphor. Like you were dropped into a foreign land, and how do you speak the language? How do you?
I think that's better than yeah, aliens. So yeah, we'll just pretend it's like I just ended up in like Saudi Arabia or something. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh, but
One
hmm.
one of the things you said was that you had to learn to reparent yourself. What does that look like? Moment to moment, how do you reparent yourself?
Reparenting means that I need to grant myself the patience and mercy that every child deserves. And usually it means that I need to really sit down with negative thoughts I'm having about myself and just tell myself, you know what? I'm thinking that because that's the traumatized state.
Hmm.
But you know what? I am worthy of love. I am a good person and I deserve love. And sometimes too, it really just means giving myself an actual hug and just saying, it's going to be all right.
Yes. So you confront the negative thoughts that come from the abusive background, basically,
Yes.
and change them. You confront them until that voice inside that doesn't have to be true anymore. And I love you no matter what. I was curious to know what role has nature played in rebuilding your life?
So nature to me has always been the mother archetype. Um, and it's been my connection to God, I would say. Um, for me, when I was growing up, I was very lucky that I lived on some land that backed right up to a brook, and then right after that was hundreds of acres of conservation land. And when I needed to get away, I did one of two things. I went and literally hid in my closet, or I went outside. And going outside was really what offered me a sense of safety and connection. Um, through really focusing on developing some sort of kinship with nature, I found that I belonged and I didn't feel so separate and out of place.
Mhm.
I felt like I related a lot more just to the mere, how do I put this? Just to like the sheer beauty of existing and being part of this earth
Mhm.
gave me this sense of connection that I felt that I couldn't get anywhere else. So for me, nature's always been this great teacher and healer.
And you pass that on with your therapy, I understand. You actually do therapy while walking through the woods with your clients. Tell me
Yes.
what, how did you start uh, how did you start with that idea?
So it really just ended up with a Google search. I can't really remember the moment, but I somehow ended up just looking up something on Google. I don't remember. And I came across this online school that's called the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy. And I was like, oh, I wonder what that is. So I clicked on it, I read about it, and I really got into it and signed up. And I ended up doing this 6 month long certification that was online, followed by 4 days of an intense immersion out in the Rocky Mountains, which was awesome. Um, just a really amazing experience. So forest therapy, it's important, that I explain what this is so people don't think it's just walking in the woods, because that's actually not really what it is at all.
Okay.
So forest therapy developed out of what is called Shinrin-yoku, which from the Japanese translates to forest bathing. What happened is back in the 1980s, when Japan was becoming a much more industrialized nation, the Japanese government noticed that the citizens' health was starting to suffer, and they were starting to have a lot more westernized diseases. They put a lot of time and money into research, into trying to figure out how can we get this under control. And they ended up really tapping more so into their Shinto roots, where they realized, you know what? Why don't we just go outside more? And the reason why that helped them a lot, and all this is backed up by research at Nippon University, is that when we go outside, we really get better. And that's not just a psychological trick. When we're outside, especially under trees, trees give off what are called phytonicids, and these are a compound that interacts very well with us. It makes us increase our natural killer cells, which increases our immunity, and it also increases uptake of serotonin. So we really do feel better.
Mhm.
Um, this then got a so all this stuff with forest bathing started to take off, and then um, we out of that created what is called forest therapy. So forest therapy is forest bathing plus, instead of it being just about how it benefits human health, it's also about having reciprocity with the earth and how to give back to the earth. So when I do a forest bathing session with people, we call it a forest therapy walk, but again, it's not really a walk. We just call it that. What it is that I lead people through a series of invitations or meditations, whatever you want to call them. It
Mhm.
starts with what's called the pleasures of presence, which is where people just really take in being outside. Then it's called What's in Motion, where their eyes close and I have them slowly spin around and just have their heart call out to whatever direction they're leading to. Then they open up their eyes and they really focus on that direction and just take in everything that's going on. Then from there, it's customized just on whatever is going on at the time. Maybe it's the weather or whatever surroundings I have to work with. But it could be that they are gathering different objects to make some sort of like mandala. It could be they have a conversation with a tree. It could be that they have a conversation with a rock. And really, I just encourage them just to be very sensory and to let their heart do the guiding. So it's different than actual psychotherapies, because when I'm doing EMDR and stuff, obviously I'm the therapist and I lead everything. Forest therapy is different because in that role, I'm a guide. I'm just the doorway for this opportunity, and it's actually nature itself that's the therapist.
Mhm.
And sometimes it can look really funny to people who are just driving by and they don't get what's going on. I did it the other day at the library with a small group of people, and we were all literally being tree huggers. We're all hugging trees, talking to trees, and people are driving by like, what? It's like, but you know what? They got a lot out of it. They enjoyed it. When I do it with people, they always tell me that they were able to have some sort of experience with nature that they never had before.
Walking, my morning walks are really important to my mental health. And I love walking in the midst of trees. There's one grove of eucalyptus trees that I especially appreciate walking through.
That sounds beautiful.
And there's such a great fragrance to eucalyptus or to pine trees. What do you appreciate the most about yourself that you've learned after all you've been through?
Mm. I think that despite all of that hardship, that I still do strive to see beauty in the world and in the strength of the human spirit. And really that I'm trying my best to undo all of the intergenerational trauma that's plagued my family because it didn't start with my parents, it started before that.
Yes,
I want to be that change maker. So I would say, beyond my career and all that kind of stuff, really my greatest achievement is that I'm trying my very, very best to be a good mom.
yes.
Um, my son is my absolute world, and
Mhm.
taking a very different approach with him where really I make sure that I'm mindful and I'm patient and that if I'm getting frustrated, that it's at the situation and it's not really at him.
Yes. Well, you're changing the legacy that you pass on, aren't you?
I'm trying my best every day.
You're trying your best. How can people get in touch with you or learn more about your work?
Thank you for asking. So there's a few different ways to reach me. The best way to reach me is to go to my website. That is www.sugarmaplecounseling with one L.com. Not two L's, that goes to a different practice. If you
Okay,
end up at the Canadian website, that's not me. Mine's the New York practice.
okay,
But I can also be found on Psychology Today if you just type in Valerie Smith. There's a few on there, but if you see the one that says Putnam Valley, New York, that's me. Um, those are the fastest ways to reach me. I do have a Facebook and stuff, but I don't really use it. So
okay. All right. Well, thank you. I so appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate all the courage it took you to keep putting one foot in front of the other toward healing and toward a better future. Uh, I'm very grateful for the good energy that you are putting into our world and to the people that work with you. Thank you so much for joining me here this morning, Valerie.
thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me on. And I absolutely love your jewelry, by the way. It's so pretty.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wear jewelry. My son's 16 months, so he'd rip it right off me.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
have a couple of cats that like to play with my jewelry, but anyway, thank you for that sweet compliment, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You as well. Bye.
Bye bye.